The human delegation's quarters were located in a section of the space station, far removed from the main conference hall. The rooms were functional but sparse, nothing like the lavish accommodations given to the Valorian leaders or the exotic energy chambers provided for the photons. David did not mind. He preferred simplicity. It gave him room to think clearly. That evening, David gathered his team around a simple table in their conference room. Marcus the scientist spread out several data tablets showing recordings from the day's session. Lisa had compiled detailed notes on every species present. Henry and Sophie arranged the information in chronological order, marking which statements contradicted previous ones and which territorial claims overlapped in ways that would eventually cause conflict. David began the briefing with a calm voice. Today, we watched the most powerful military civilization in the galaxy, the most logical species ever to evolve, and the most advanced energy-based beings make decisions that are fundamentally flawed. They are building a system that cannot possibly hold together. Marcus pulled up the territorial map they had created. Look at the Andromeda sector that Cross claimed for the Valorians. It has 17 established trade routes, all of which pass through silicate territory. The crystalline beings accepted their territories without question, but mathematically, they will control the flow of commerce to the Valorian claim. That is not a position of weakness, Lisa added to the analysis. Cross made those claims from a position of military strength, but he did not think about the economic implications. The Valorians will need to purchase resources from the silicates to maintain their position. Within 5 years, they will realize they are economically dependent on the very species they tried to dominate. Henry pointed to another detail. The photons are insulted by their territories. I saw it in how their energy forms fluctuated. They are brilliant beings, possibly the most intelligent species present, but they are also proud. Cross treated them as lesser powers, and they will remember that. They will look for ways to prove their superiority, probably through some kind of technological competition. Sophie studied the behavioral recordings. Every species made decisions based on their fundamental nature. The Valorians used force. The silicates used logic. The photons used pride. None of them actually listened to what the others were saying. They only heard what confirmed their own view of the galaxy. David nodded slowly. This is why we sat at the back. If we had sat at the front, we would have been forced to participate in their system. We would have claimed territories and made agreements like everyone else. We would have been trapped in their logic. By sitting at the back, we observe the entire game without being part of it. We see the flaws they cannot see because they are too busy asserting their dominance. Marcus looked concerned. But David, by sitting at the back, do we not appear weak? Do we not encourage Cross to see us as insignificant? David smiled. Exactly. That is the gift of this position. Let them think we are weak and afraid. It means they will not watch us closely. It means they will not see what we are actually doing. Over the following days, the human delegation continued to sit at the back of the conference hall, while the great powers of the galaxy spoke and argued among themselves. Cross presented grand visions of Valorian military expansion. The silicates countered with calculations showing the mathematical limits of warfare and conquest. The photons offered their services in weaponizing stellar phenomena, demanding more prestigious territories in return. Meanwhile, the humans took notes. They documented every contradiction. They recorded every moment when a species made a claim that contradicted something they had said hours earlier. They noted when the Valorians spoke of peace but arranged military operations. They observed when the silicates cited logic but made emotionally driven decisions about territorial disputes. Lisa became particularly skilled at reading the subtle shifts in each species' behavior. When a photon's energy form dimmed, she knew they were frustrated. When a silicate's crystalline structure reflected light in a particular pattern, she understood they had encountered a problem they could not solve with pure mathematics. When Cross's voice grew louder, Lisa recognized it as compensation for the doubt he felt beneath his confidence. Marcus studied the technology being discussed. The Valorians boasted of weapon systems that could destroy entire fleets. The photons described energy manipulation techniques that seemed impossible. The silicates explained computational networks that spanned entire star systems. But Marcus realized something important. Each species had developed expertise in one area and remained blind to their own weaknesses. The Valorians had powerful weapons but inefficient supply chains. The photons had incredible energy manipulation, but no defense against physical attacks. The silicates could calculate anything, but could not improvise when circumstances changed unexpectedly. On the 5th day of the conference, Henry and Sophie made an interesting discovery. They cross-referenced the territorial claims with historical trade data and found something troubling. The territories being allocated did not match with the actual locations of valuable resources. The Valorians had claimed regions with lower mineral wealth than other areas they could have taken. The silicates had accepted territories that were mathematically inferior to available alternatives. The photons had agreed to sectors that had no stellar nurseries worth mentioning. When they presented this information to David, he understood immediately. They did not really think about their choices. They were too focused on asserting dominance and making sure everyone else knew their ranking in the power structure. They claimed territories not based on actual value, but on what sounded impressive and what maintained their positions of authority. David decided to take a risk. During a break in the proceedings, he approached General Cross alone. The Valorian commander looked surprised to see the human delegate approaching him without being called. "General Cross," David said respectfully, "I have observed your negotiations with great interest. Your military strategy is impressive." Cross seemed suspicious. "What do you want, human? Come to beg for better territories?" "No," David replied. "I came to ask a question. When you claimed the Andromeda sector, did you consider how the trade routes through silicate territory would affect your supply lines?" Cross stiffened. The question had hit something sensitive. For a moment his confident exterior cracked, and David saw the uncertainty beneath, but Cross quickly recovered, his massive body straightening with renewed authority. "The Valorian Empire adapts," he said coldly. "We will make whatever adjustments are necessary. Our strength is unquestioned." "I did not suggest otherwise," David said calmly. "I merely observed that your strategy seems incomplete. But perhaps I misunderstood your intentions." David walked away, leaving Cross standing alone with doubts that had not existed moments before. That evening, the human delegation gathered again to discuss what they had learned. The pattern was becoming clear. The dominant species of the galaxy had built a system based on power and dominance, but they had not built it on sustainability. Their system would collapse under its own contradictions within a few years, maybe sooner if the right pressure was applied at the right moments. "What do we do with this information?" Sophie asked. David looked out at the stars beyond the window. "We wait. We continue to sit at the back and observe. We document everything. We understand not just what they are doing, but why they are doing it. We learn their fears and their strengths, and when the moment comes when their system begins to fail, we will be ready to offer them an alternative." Lisa understood immediately. "We are not just observing a conference. We are studying how the galaxy actually works beneath the surface of power and dominance." "Yes," David said, "and we are preparing to change it." The humans sat in silence watching the galaxy turn beneath them. Tomorrow the conference would continue. More grand claims would be made. More territories would be divided. More contradictions would pile upon contradictions. And through it all, the humans would sit at the back unseen and patient, gathering the knowledge they would need to reshape the future of every civilization present. The crisis came suddenly without warning in the middle of the second week of negotiations. An alert system aboard the space station began to sound, a low warning tone that made everyone in the conference hall stop what they were doing. General Cross stood immediately, his hand moving to a communication device at his side. Around the hall, the other delegations tensed. The silicate's crystalline forms began to shimmer with agitation. The photon's energy bodies flared with concern. A technician's voice came through the communication system. "General Cross, we have detected a massive asteroid field moving rapidly through the silicate territories. Current trajectory indicates it will impact populated systems within hours. The asteroid field appears to be artificially manipulated. This is not a natural phenomenon." The entire conference hall erupted into chaos. Cross bellowed orders, commanding his military forces to mobilize. The silicates began calculating trajectories and impact angles, their crystalline forms glowing as they processed the enormous amount of data. The photons argued with each other about who should take command of the response effort. Each species seemed to assume that the crisis was an attack from the others, and within moments, accusations began flying across the hall. "This is a Valorian attack on my territories," one silicate representative declared. his voice distorted by anger and fear. "We photons would never resort to such crude methods." Another energy being responded. "This has the mark of military incompetence, not advanced technology." "Silence," Cross commanded, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "The asteroid field is moving toward all our interests. It threatens the trade routes we have established. It threatens the power structure we have created. This is clearly an attack by some external enemy, perhaps a rival civilization from beyond our known galaxy." David watched from the back of the hall as the dominant powers of the galaxy began to panic. It was interesting to observe. The moment a real crisis appeared, all their grand theories about power and dominance seemed to fall apart. Cross no longer seemed so confident. The silicates could not calculate their way out of immediate danger. The photons realized that their energy manipulation might not be enough to stop an asteroid field large enough to destroy planets. Lisa leaned toward David and whispered, "They have no idea how to work together." "No," David agreed quietly. "They have never needed to. They have always solved problems through dominance or force. Now they face a problem that cannot be solved by any single species acting alone." For the next 2 hours, the conference became a war room. Cross demanded that his military forces be given command of the response. The silicates insisted that their computational abilities should direct the operation. The photons argued that their energy manipulation was the only thing that could actually stop the asteroids. Meanwhile, no plan was actually being implemented. No coordinated response was taking place. The asteroid field continued moving closer to populated systems. General Cross stood at the holographic display, staring at the moving asteroids with increasing frustration. His military forces were mobilizing, but without clear objectives. His warships were moving to intercept, but the calculations for the intercept were being done by panicked military officers rather than by the silicate computers. The result was chaos. Ships were crossing paths with each other. Calculations were being made and then immediately changed. Nothing was working together. Finally, David stood up. He rose from his seat at the back of the hall and walked forward with calm, deliberate steps. Every eye in the room turned toward him. Cross looked startled that the human was moving at all, let alone approaching the command center. "General Cross," David said in a clear, quiet voice. "May I speak?" Cross seemed confused by the question, as if he had forgotten that humans could speak at all. But something in David's tone, something about the complete absence of fear or desperation, made Cross pause. He gestured for David to continue. "The asteroid field cannot be stopped by any single approach," David began. "Your military warships can provide the force needed to deflect the asteroids, but you need precise trajectory calculations to make that force effective. The silicates can provide those calculations, but calculations alone will not move asteroids. The photons can provide energy manipulation to fine-tune the deflections, but they need something to deflect. Each species has a piece of the solution. Separately, you will fail. Together, you might succeed." For a moment, no one spoke. Then a silicate representative moved forward. "The human speaks truth. I have been running calculations, and single-species approaches all result in failure scenarios. But a coordinated approach combining Valorian military capability, silicate computation, and photon energy manipulation could work. The probability of success would be approximately 78%, assuming perfect coordination." One of the photons shifted their energy form, and David recognized it as a sign of grudging acceptance. "The human is correct. Our individual strengths are insufficient. Collaboration appears necessary." Cross looked as though he wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the hierarchy he had established, but the stakes were too high. Entire civilizations would be destroyed if nothing was done. He made a decision that seemed to cost him something fundamental, a sacrifice of his pride and his need for dominance. "Very well," he said. "We will attempt this collaboration, but it will be brief. Once this crisis is resolved, we will return to our previous negotiations." David did not argue the point. Instead, he turned to his team. "Marcus, I need you to work with the silicates. Help them translate their calculations into something the Valorian military can actually use. Lisa, you work with the photons. Make sure their energy output is synchronized with the asteroid deflections. Henry and Sophie, you coordinate with the Valorian Command Center. Make sure everyone is communicating clearly." What happened over the next 3 hours was remarkable. The humans became the bridge between 3 very different ways of thinking about the problem. Marcus would take a silicate calculation and explain it to the Valorian military officers in terms they could understand. Lisa would monitor the photon energy manipulation and suggest adjustments when the deflection angles did not match the calculations. Henry and Sophie would relay information between all the groups, making sure that if one species discovered a problem, the others knew about it immediately and could adjust their response. The Valorian warships began moving into position, their weapons systems charged and prepared to fire on the asteroids. The silicates provided constant stream of updated calculations as the asteroid field got closer. The photons began their energy manipulation, carefully sculpting beams of pure energy to nudge the asteroid slightly off course. Then a problem appeared that no one had anticipated. One of the largest asteroids had an internal structure that was different from the others. The silicate calculations suddenly became invalid for that particular asteroid. The Valorian weapon systems were targeting it, but the impact point was wrong. The photons realized the energy they were directing at it was being absorbed rather than deflected. For a moment, panic threatened to return. But David saw the problem immediately. He understood it instinctively because humans on Earth had learned to adapt to unexpected situations for thousands of years. "Redirect the Valorian fire to the left side of the asteroid," he called out. "The internal structure is offset. The energy from the photons is being absorbed by the core. We need to impact the outer layer first to weaken it, then apply the energy to the weakened section." The silicate computers were still trying to calculate the new trajectory when David's intuitive solution was implemented. The Valorian ships adjusted their fire. The photons shifted their energy manipulation, and the problem asteroid was deflected successfully. One by one, the asteroids were moved from their collision course. The crisis was not entirely averted. Some asteroids would still impact unpopulated regions. Some damage would still occur to the outer territories. But the populated systems would be spared. The catastrophe would not happen. As the operation concluded, General Cross approached David. The Valorian commander looked different somehow. His absolute confidence had been shaken. He had been forced to work with other species, to accept their help, to acknowledge that his military strength alone was insufficient. "You saved many lives today, human," Cross said. It was not quite an apology, but it was something close to respect. "We all did," David replied. Each species contributed what only they could provide. That was the key. Cross nodded slowly, but David could see that the Valorian leader was already thinking about how to reassert his dominance, how to return to the old hierarchy. The crisis had taught him something, but whether he would actually learn from that lesson remained to be seen. As the delegations dispersed to process what had happened, David returned to the back of the hall. He sat down in his usual seat and looked out at the space beyond the conference station. The asteroid field was now harmless, its danger deflected, but David realized that they had just passed an important moment. The great powers of the galaxy had been forced to see their own limitations. That moment of vulnerability could be used to build something new, something better, or it could be forgotten, and the old hierarchy could be restored. Everything now depended on what happened next. The next morning, the conference hall was quieter than it had been before. The delegations arrived not with the aggressive posturing and territorial declarations that had characterized the first days, but with a kind of uncertain hesitation. Something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere. The great powers of the galaxy had worked together, had acknowledged each other's strengths, and had discovered that collaboration was not the same as weakness. General Cross seemed diminished somehow, though his massive physical form was unchanged. He stood before the gathered delegations and attempted to resume the old tone of authority, but it felt forced, artificial. The moment had passed. The old hierarchy was cracking. A silicate representative stood and addressed the assembly. His crystalline form reflected the light as he spoke. "The cooperation yesterday was computationally efficient. Our models indicate that a permanent collaborative framework would yield superior outcomes for all parties. The data supports systematic cooperation rather than isolated territorial dominance." This was extraordinary. A silicate was actually suggesting that logic supported cooperation rather than dominance. The other species understood immediately that something had changed in how the silicates viewed the situation. One of the photons shifted their energy form and spoke. "While the energy-based peoples have always known of our individual superiority, Yesterday's operation revealed that even our magnificent abilities benefit from coordination with other species. This is surprising, but the data cannot be disputed. It was as close to an admission of limitation as a photon would ever make. Cross attempted to reassert control. What happened yesterday was an emergency response. Now we return to our normal negotiations about territories and resources. The temporary cooperation is concluded. But David stood and walked forward again. This time no one seemed shocked. The humans had earned the right to speak. "General Cross," David said calmly. "Yesterday you learned something important, not just about cooperation but about yourselves. The Valorian military is powerful, but it cannot function without the silicate calculations. The silicate computers are brilliant, but their calculations are useless without the Valorian force to implement them. The photon energy is magnificent, but it needs precision and direction from the others. Each of you is incomplete without the others." Cross's scales flickered with anger, but he did not interrupt. David continued. "The reason we sat at the back of this hall was not because we were weak or afraid. We sat at the back because we could see what you could not. You were all too focused on proving your superiority to understand how you actually functioned. You see strength as dominance over others. But true strength is different. True strength is knowing when you need others, being flexible enough to work with them, and having the wisdom to listen to voices that come from outside your own understanding." A long silence filled the hall. Then Lisa stood and approached Cross directly. She pulled out the documentation they had compiled during the conference. "General, may I show you something?" Cross seemed almost confused by the question, as if he was not used to anyone asking his permission before doing things. But he nodded, and Lisa displayed the data on the holographic screen. "These are the territorial claims made during your opening negotiations," Lisa explained. "And these are the actual resource locations in the galaxy. When you compare them, we find interesting contradictions." She highlighted several sections. "The Andromeda sector that you claimed for Valorian control contains fewer mineral resources than 17 other regions you did not claim. The silicate territories you accepted contain computational advantage positions, but they were negotiated without analyzing the trade route implications. The photon sectors have stellar phenomena, but not the type that actually match their stated research needs." A silicate moved forward to examine the data more closely. "This is accurate," the crystalline being confirmed. "We accepted territories based on mathematical optimization of a single variable. We did not consider the multivariate implications of trade relationships and resource interdependency." The photons seemed agitated by this revelation. One of them addressed the assembly. "You are suggesting that our territorial claims were suboptimal?" "Not suboptimal," David said gently. "Just incomplete. You each made decisions based on your individual perspective. A Valorian warrior sees the galaxy through the lens of military conquest. A silicate sees it through pure mathematics. A photon sees it through the potential of energy manipulation, but no single perspective reveals the complete picture." Marcus, the human scientist, stepped forward. "The complete picture is this. Every species is dependent on every other species. The Valorians need silicate calculation to make their military effective. The silicates need Valorian protection to maintain their territories. The photons need both to provide the environmental conditions they require for their research. Remove any one of these species from the equation and the entire system becomes unstable." Henry added his observation. "Yesterday, when we coordinated the response to the asteroid crisis, we were not creating something artificial or temporary. We were revealing something that was already true about the galaxy. You needed each other. You just had not admitted it yet." Sophie spoke from the side of the hall. "The question is not whether you can work together. Yesterday proved you can. The question is whether you will choose to build your future on that truth, or whether you will try to return to the old way of pretending that dominance is the same as strength." Cross stood very still. The other delegations waited to see how he would respond. In that moment, David could see the struggle happening within the Valorian commander. Part of him wanted to reject all of this, to declare that the Valorians needed no one, that their military might was all they required. But another part of him, the part that had felt the fear beneath his confidence during the territorial negotiations, knew that what the humans were saying was true. "What are you proposing?" Cross finally asked. His voice was quieter than before, less certain. David walked to the holographic display and brought up a new image. It showed the galaxy restructured, not as separate territories claimed by different species, but as an interconnected network where resources, knowledge, and capabilities flowed between civilizations. We propose a new framework, David explained, not based on dominance or conquest, but on mutual contribution. Each species brings their strengths to shared challenges. Decisions are made not by whoever is strongest, but by consensus that considers all perspectives. The Valorian military protects the interests of all. The silicate calculations guide everyone toward optimal outcomes. The photon research benefits the entire galaxy, and humans provide something else. What could humans possibly provide? A photon asked skeptically. Perspective, David said simply. The ability to see situations from outside the constraints of your own nature. Adaptability when circumstances change unexpectedly. The understanding that strength is not about dominance, but about connection and cooperation. These are the gifts that saved you yesterday, Lisa added. We sat at the back because that position allowed us to see the whole picture. We were not distracted by the need to prove superiority. We could notice what each of you was missing because we were not trapped by the same limitations. A silicate began running calculations, processing the implications of what the humans were proposing. After several moments, the crystalline being announced, the proposed framework has 84% probability of generating greater stability and resource efficiency than the current territorial system. Mathematical consensus supports restructuring. The photons exchanged energy pulses among themselves, a form of communication the humans could not fully understand. But eventually, one of them spoke. Our analysis suggests that collaborative research would accelerate our technological advancement by approximately 200%. We agreed to participate in this framework. Cross looked directly at David. If we do this, if we restructure everything around cooperation instead of dominance, what role do humans play? You have no military power. You have no computational abilities that match the silicates. You have no energy manipulation like the photons. Why should you have any authority in this new system? David smiled. We do not seek authority. We seek a position where we can continue to do what we did yesterday. Observe, understand, coordinate, and adapt. In your new cooperative system, you will need people who can see problems from multiple angles, who can help you communicate across your different natures, who can remind you when you are falling back into patterns of dominance instead of cooperation. That is what humans do best. And sitting at the back? Cross asked. That will remain important, David said. Some of the best perspectives come from positions where you are not forced to participate in the political games. In your new advisory system, human delegates will sit where they can see everything clearly and provide counsel from that position of observation. We will not push to be in front, not because we are weak, but because the back is where we are most effective. The conference hall fell silent as each species considered what this meant. The old hierarchy was not being replaced by a human hierarchy. It was being replaced by something fundamentally different. A system where strength came from cooperation and wisdom came. 3 months had passed since the transformation began. The space station that had hosted the Valorian conference now served a very different purpose. It was no longer a place where great powers divided territories and made declarations of dominance. Instead, it had become the center of genuine galactic cooperation, a place where different civilizations worked together to solve shared problems. The new assembly hall had been reorganized. At the front, there was no longer a single position of authority occupied by whoever claimed the most power. Instead, there was a circular arrangement where representatives from each major civilization sat at equal positions. The Valorian military advisors, the silicate computational specialists, and the photon energy researchers all occupied spaces of equivalent importance. And in the back, where they had always chosen to sit, the human delegation maintained their position of observation and coordination. David sat with his team, watching how the different species had adapted to the new way of working. Lisa continued her analysis of political dynamics and behavioral patterns. Marcus collaborated with silicate scientists on joint research projects. Henry coordinated communication between different delegations. Sophie documented the successes and challenges of the new system. General Cross was no longer quite so certain of everything. The changes had not been easy for him. His entire understanding of strength and leadership had been built on the foundation of military dominance. Learning to share authority with other species, to value their contributions equally with his own, had required a fundamental reshaping of his worldview. But he had made the effort, and the Valorian people had followed his example. The first major test of the new system came from an unexpected direction. A message arrived from a distant part of the galaxy. A civilization called the Zenthians, a species that the known powers had never encountered before, was expanding rapidly through previously unexplored regions. They were aggressive and territorial, claiming entire star systems without negotiation or consultation. They showed no interest in cooperation. They wanted dominance, just like the old Valorian approach. When the news reached the assembly hall, there was immediate tension. The old patterns tried to reassert themselves. Cross wanted to mobilize the Valorian military to crush this new threat. The Photons wanted to demonstrate their superior energy manipulation. The Silicates wanted to immediately calculate military scenarios and optimal attack strategies. But David stood and addressed the assembly calmly. This is exactly the kind of problem that your old system could not solve. If you respond with military force, the Zenthians will respond with greater force. You will enter into a cycle of conflict that will destroy lives and resources on both sides. There is another way. Cross showed his frustration. Humans speak of peace, but the Zenthians understand only strength. We must show them our power. No, David said quietly. We must understand them first. Why are they expanding? What do they seek? What are they afraid of? Once we understand these things, we can offer them something better than conflict. Lisa presented a detailed analysis of Zenthian behavior that the human delegation had been quietly compiling since the first message arrived. She showed patterns in their territorial expansion, communication attempts, and resource gathering. She pointed out that the Zenthians were not truly aggressive in the way the old Valorian Empire had been. They were desperate. Their home system was dying. They were searching for survival, not conquest. They are expanding because they have no choice, Lisa explained. Their star is becoming unstable. They need new territories not for dominance but for the survival of their people. They approach it with aggression because it is the only method they know. But if they were offered cooperation, if they were shown that there was an alternative to endless conflict, they might accept it. A Silicate interjected with calculations. The probability of peaceful negotiation success is only 23% based on current Zenthian behavior patterns. Military conflict would be more reliable. Military conflict would be reliable in producing victory, David agreed. But at what cost? How many lives on both sides? How much resources spent on destruction instead of creation? And what do you do when the next aggressive civilization emerges? Enter another cycle of conflict? Henry stepped forward with a proposal that the human team had developed. We suggest a coordinated approach. Send a diplomatic delegation composed of representatives from all the civilizations. Show the Zenthians that we are united not in military strength, but in the desire to work together. Offer them a place in our cooperative framework. Promise them resources to help stabilize their dying star. But be clear that this comes with the acceptance of our values of cooperation and non-dominance. Sophie added, if they reject cooperation and continue their aggressive expansion, then a combined military response from all the civilizations would be far more effective than any single species acting alone. But we should attempt peace first. Cross remained skeptical, but something had shifted in the Valorian commander. He had experienced the benefits of cooperation, and he could not deny them. After a long discussion with his advisors and with the other delegations, Cross agreed to the human proposal. A diplomatic mission would be sent to the Zenthians. The mission was composed of a Valorian military representative to show strength, a Silicate computational specialist to offer technological assistance, a photon energy expert to provide solutions for the Zenthian star stabilization problem, and David himself to serve as mediator and bridge between the different species and the Zenthians. What happened during the diplomatic mission became one of the most important stories in galactic history. David spent weeks with the Zenthian leaders, learning their history, understanding their fears, and showing them that cooperation was possible. The Silicate specialist worked with Zenthian scientists on calculations for star stabilization. The photon energy expert designed systems that could reinforce the dying star and extend its life by thousands of years. The Valorian representative pledged military protection for the Zenthians, while they learned to function within the cooperative framework. But most importantly, David helped the Zenthians understand something that the old Valorian Empire had never learned. True strength did not come from conquering others or claiming territories through force. True strength came from connection, from having allies who would stand with you, from knowing that when you faced challenges, other civilizations would help because you had committed to helping them in turn. Within 6 months, the Zenthians had joined the Galactic Alliance. Their star had been stabilized. Their people had found new purpose not in territorial conquest, but in contributing their unique capabilities to the collective knowledge and strength of the united galaxy. As the months continued to pass, more civilizations discovered the cooperative framework. Some came willingly, recognizing the benefits. Others were forced to join after encountering the combined military might of the Alliance. But once integrated, they too discovered the advantages of cooperation over isolation and conflict. David sat at the back of the assembly hall one evening, watching the various species work together on a joint research project that would not have been possible under the old system. Valorian military engineers worked alongside silicate computational specialists. Photon energy experts collaborated with Zenthian material scientists, and human coordinators moved between the different groups, making sure everyone was communicating effectively and understanding each other's contributions. Cross approached David and sat beside him, something the Valorian general never would have done in the early days of the conference. "You were right," Cross said simply. "About everything." "I was not right about everything," David replied, "but I was right about one thing. The different ways of seeing the galaxy, the different strengths of each species, they are most valuable when they work together. No single perspective contains all the answers." "Why did you always sit at the back?" Cross asked. "Even now, even though you have proven yourselves invaluable to our entire civilization, you still choose to sit at the back of the assembly hall. You could sit at the front. You have earned that position." David smiled and looked out at the stars beyond the window. "The front is a place of power and attention. Many beings want to be there because they believe it is a position of strength. But the back is a position of clarity. From here, I can see everything without being distracted by the politics of who sits where. From here, I can notice when someone is uncomfortable or when a solution is being missed. From here, I can remind everyone that we are not in competition, but in collaboration." "So you choose humility deliberately?" Cross asked, still trying to understand a concept that ran counter to everything his culture had taught him. "Not humility exactly," David said. "I choose perspective. I choose the position where I can be most useful. That position happens to be at the back. Perhaps for another species or in another situation, the most useful position would be at the front. But for humans, for now, this is where we belong." Cross nodded slowly, and David could see the understanding beginning to grow in the Valorian commander's eyes. The concept that position did not determine value, that the most important contribution sometimes came from unexpected places, was becoming part of his. A year had passed since the Zenthians joined the Galactic Alliance. The cooperative system that had seemed fragile and uncertain at its beginning had grown strong and resilient. New challenges had emerged, and each time the Alliance faced them with increasing confidence. But success sometimes brought unexpected problems, and this was a lesson that all the civilizations were about to learn. The crisis began not with military conflict or astronomical disasters, but with something far more subtle. Tensions were rising between the Valorian military hierarchy and the new collaborative decision-making process. Cross had begun to feel that the democratic approach was slowing down Valorian responses to threats. The silicate computational specialists had grown frustrated with limitations placed on their research into weapon systems, afraid that the emphasis on cooperation was weakening their defensive capabilities. The photons had started to question why they should share their advanced energy technology with civilizations that they considered less evolved. In other words, the old patterns were trying to reassert themselves. The alliance was beginning to fracture from within. David noticed the tension before it became obvious to everyone else. He saw it in how Cross's voice changed during meetings, in the way the silicate delegates began to sit slightly apart from the other species, in the energy fluctuations of the photons that signaled frustration rather than enthusiasm. He mentioned his concerns to Lisa during one of their evening briefings in the back of the assembly hall. "It is happening," Lisa said quietly. "The system is being tested by success instead of crisis. When they were facing the asteroid field or the Zenthians, they needed cooperation. But now that we are secure, the old desires for dominance are returning." "This is the most dangerous moment," David agreed. Many alliances fail not because they face external threats, but because they cannot maintain unity when the immediate danger is gone. Internal divisions destroy what external pressure could never damage. What made the situation more complicated was that the tensions were not entirely unreasonable. The Valorians did have legitimate concerns about defensive readiness. The Silicates did make valid points about research limitations. The Photons were correct that shared technology benefited less advanced species disproportionately. The problem was not that these concerns were without merit, but that each species was beginning to prioritize their own interests over the collective good. David called a special session in the assembly hall. He requested time to address all the delegations. Cross seemed almost relieved to see a human intervention, as if he had been waiting for someone to name the problem that everyone was avoiding. David stood in the center of the circular arrangement and spoke calmly. I have been observing growing tension among our civilizations. Each of you is beginning to wonder if the cooperative framework is truly serving your interests. Some of you are asking if you sacrificed too much when you accepted this new way of working. These thoughts are natural, but they are dangerous. They lead back to the old patterns of isolation and conflict. A silicate representative responded. The human is correct. My analysis indicates that our research advancement has slowed by 18% compared to autonomous development timelines. We have gained benefits from collaboration, but we have also lost something. Yes, David acknowledged. You have lost the absolute freedom to pursue your own agenda without considering the impact on others. You have gained the benefits of cooperation, but you have lost the purity of pursuing your own species' interests without limitation. The question is whether the gain is worth the loss. Marcus stepped forward with new data that the human team had compiled during the past year. He displayed graphs showing resource allocation, population growth, technological advancement, and quality of life metrics for each civilization. Autonomous development timelines are theoretical, Marcus explained. They assume that each species would develop as rapidly alone as they are developing together. But this ignores the actual cost of isolation. When the Valorians worked alone, they spent resources on defensive systems against potential threats from other species. Now those resources are invested in technology that benefits everyone. When the Silicates worked alone, they spent time and computational power on problems that other species have already solved. Now they build on the knowledge of the entire alliance. He highlighted a specific section of the data. The actual result is that every single civilization in this alliance is advancing faster than they could possibly advance alone. The Valorians have defensive capabilities far superior to what military-only development could produce, because they now benefit from silicate optimization and photon energy integration. The Silicates are solving computational problems that no single species could address alone. The Photons have discovered applications for their energy manipulation that they never imagined in isolation. Sophie added her observations from a social perspective. But there is something more important than just resource allocation and technological advancement. The quality of life for the citizens of each civilization has improved dramatically. They have security that they did not have before. They have access to resources and knowledge that were previously impossible to obtain. They have reduced their fears about attack or domination. These improvements come from cooperation, not from isolation. Henry presented the most striking data of all. He showed comparative statistics between civilizations in the Alliance and civilizations still working in isolation. The isolated species had maintained higher autonomy and complete control over their resources, but they also showed higher rates of internal conflict, lower population growth, and slower technological advancement. The choice is not between cooperation and loss of progress, Henry explained. The choice is between cooperation and stagnation. The isolated civilizations are not advancing. They are struggling to survive. Meanwhile, we are thriving. Cross listened carefully to all of this information. The Valorian general stood and addressed the assembly. I have been uncertain about whether our military capabilities are being properly maintained under this cooperative system. But I must admit that our actual defensive capabilities are superior now to what they were when we worked alone. We face a paradox. We gain more strength through cooperation than through isolation, yet our emotions and our cultural history tell us that we should be independent and dominant. This is the challenge of evolution, David said simply. You are learning a new way of being. It is harder than the old way because it requires constant effort to remember why cooperation is valuable. When things are difficult, you want to revert to what is familiar. The old way of dominance is familiar. The new way of cooperation is still new and requires conscious commitment. A photon energy being shifted form, in what David had learned to recognize as a sign of deep thought. The human speaks truth that is difficult to accept. We photons have always believed that we were superior to other forms of existence. Working with beings of physical form and computational limitation was always seen as beneath us. Yet our research now moves forward faster than ever before in our history. Our achievements are multiplied by collaboration. This requires adjustment of our fundamental beliefs about superiority and progress. Lisa addressed the assembly from her position at the back. The real question each of you must answer is this: do you value your independence more than you value your flourishing? You can have complete autonomy, or you can have greater prosperity. You cannot have both. Every civilization faces this choice at some point in their development. Most choose isolation and suffer the consequences. Some choose cooperation and thrive. We are asking you to continue choosing cooperation, not because it is easy, but because it is better. Over the next several hours, the delegations discussed the tension openly. It was not a short or comfortable discussion. The Valorians expressed their fears about losing military readiness. The Silicates questioned whether they were sacrificing intellectual advancement. The Photons worried about their superiority being diluted by collaboration with less advanced species. The Zenthians, who had only recently joined, revealed their own anxieties about being absorbed into a larger structure and losing their unique identity. But David and his team addressed each concern with evidence and reasoning. They showed that military readiness had actually improved through cooperation. They demonstrated that intellectual advancement had accelerated despite some research restrictions. They explained that collaboration did not eliminate unique identity, but rather enhanced it by allowing each species to specialize in what they did best. As the discussion continued, something remarkable happened. The delegations began to see that their concerns were the same concerns that the Alliance had addressed during the crisis with the asteroid field and the Zenthian encounter. They were rediscovering lessons they had already learned. Cooperation was not about one species dominating another. It was about recognizing mutual dependence and creating systems that benefited everyone. By the end of the session, Cross made a formal recommendation. The Valorian Empire commits to continuing our participation in this cooperative alliance. We acknowledge that our interests are better served through collaboration than through isolation or dominance. We pledge to work with. The Grand Conference Hall of the Valorian Empire stretched across a massive space station orbiting Valoris Prime. Towering pillars of reinforced metal reached toward the domed ceiling, and the floor gleamed with the reflection of holographic displays showing trade routes and territorial maps. The morning light filtered through the transparent walls, revealing the vast expanse of space beyond. This was where the most powerful beings in the galaxy gathered to discuss the future of their civilizations. General Cross stood at the center of the hall, his massive reptilian body casting long shadows across the floor. He was over 3 meters tall, with scales that shimmered between deep green and bronze in the light. His eyes were sharp and calculated, the eyes of a warrior who had led his people to dominate 17 star systems. The Valorians were the strongest military force in the known galaxy. Their warships could destroy entire planets. Their soldiers could survive direct plasma fire without breaking a sweat. They did not conquer through diplomacy or trade alone. They conquered through strength and the willingness to use it. Cross watched as the other delegations began to arrive at the conference. First came the Silicates, a crystalline species with bodies that looked like living diamonds reflecting every color of the spectrum. They moved with mathematical precision, each step calculated to the millimeter. The Silicates were the most logical beings in the galaxy. Their computers could solve problems in microseconds that would take humans years to comprehend. They had built entire civilizations based on pure reason and mathematical theory. Next arrived the Photons, energy-based beings who could manipulate light and electromagnetic waves with perfect control. They appeared as humanoid shapes made of pure energy, constantly shifting and glowing with power. The Photons had transcended physical form thousands of years ago. They could move at the speed of light and weaponize radiation in ways that made other species tremble. They had little respect for those who remained bound to physical bodies. Then the humans came through the entrance. They were small compared to the Valorians. The tallest human in the delegation barely reached Cross's chest. Their bodies were soft and fragile. They had no scales, no crystalline structure, no energy-based existence, just soft skin, bones that could break easily, and organs that seemed remarkably vulnerable. Yet there were 5 of them, and they carried themselves with a strange calm that seemed out of place in this gathering of cosmic powers. Ambassador David led the human delegation. He was a man in his middle years with dark hair and thoughtful eyes. He wore a simple diplomatic uniform, nothing flashy or threatening. Behind him came Officer Lisa, whose sharp attention took in every detail of the hall. Then came Marcus, the human scientist, along with 2 other team members named Henry and Sophie. They all moved together with a kind of unified purpose, quiet and composed. Cross watched them take positions. The Valorians sat at the front of the hall in the most prominent seats. The silicates positioned themselves to the left, where they could observe and analyze everything. The photons arranged themselves in an elevated section, literally above everyone else. They wanted to make sure everyone understood their superiority. Then David led his team toward the back of the hall. They moved without hesitation, without any sign of reluctance or shame. They simply walked to the rear wall, found seats, and sat down. It was as if sitting at the back of the conference was the most natural thing in the world to them. David settled into a chair against the wall and pulled out a small notebook. Lisa sat beside him, her eyes moving across the room, cataloging every detail. The other humans did the same, watching and waiting quietly. Cross felt something stir in his chest. It was not quite anger, but something close. In Valorian culture, position meant everything. Those who sat at the front were the strong ones, the leaders, the ones who mattered. Those who sat at the back were, well, Cross had never really thought about it. The Valorians never sat at the back. The Valorians always took the most important positions. That was simply how things were done. But these humans sat at the back as if they had chosen it deliberately, as if they wanted to be there. General Cross stood to begin the conference. His massive frame commanded attention simply through sheer physical presence. His voice boomed across the hall, deep and resonant with absolute confidence. "Welcome to the Valorian Conference of Galactic Powers," he announced. "We are gathered here today to discuss the territories we control, the trade routes that benefit our people, and the future structure of our galaxy. The Valorian Empire has called this meeting because the time has come for the strong to formally divide what is rightfully theirs." The silicates registered this statement with mathematical precision, their crystalline forms shifting subtly as they processed the hierarchy being established. The photons seemed amused by Cross's confidence, which only annoyed him more. Cross continued, laying out a map of the galaxy on the central holographic display. "The Valorian Empire claims the Andromeda Sector, the Phoenix Corridor, and the Keldar Expanse. These are ours by right of conquest. Our military power is unquestioned. No other species can match our capabilities." He gestured to the silicates. "The crystalline peoples may have computational advantages, but computation is worthless without the strength to defend what you calculate. We offer you the silicate valleys and the surrounding asteroid fields. You may mine and process these resources, but understand that Valorian warships will maintain order in these regions." The photons shifted their energy forms, a sign of irritation. Cross turned to them. "The energy beings may manipulate radiation and light, but even your power has limits. We grant you the plasma reaches and the stellar nurseries. Your scientific work there will benefit all of us, particularly the Valorian Empire." As Cross spoke, David wrote in his notebook. He was not taking notes of the territorial claims. Instead, he was writing observations. He noticed how Cross's confidence came from genuine power, yes, but also from something else. Fear. There was a fear beneath all that dominance. A fear that if Cross stopped asserting his power for even a moment, someone would challenge it. David noticed how the silicates accepted their territories without question. They calculated the mathematical values of the resources they were given and concluded that resistance would be illogical. They had never learned to negotiate or to consider possibilities beyond pure calculation. David noticed how the photons pretended indifference to the territories offered, but their energy forms dimmed slightly when Cross claimed superiority over them. They were insulted but trying to hide it through arrogance. Lisa leaned over and whispered to David, "They have no idea what they are doing." David nodded slightly and continued writing. "As for the humans," Cross said, finally acknowledging the delegation in the back, "Earth is a single planet in an insignificant system. Your species is young and relatively powerless. You have been permitted to attend this conference as observers. You may learn from the great powers and understand your place in the galactic hierarchy. We do not expect much contribution from you." David looked up from his notebook and made eye contact with General Cross across the hall. Then he smiled quietly and returned to writing. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable, but Cross felt an odd flicker of something. It was not quite confusion, but it was close. The conference continued through the day. Cross and the other dominant species carved up the galaxy between themselves, making agreements that seemed logical only because they came from positions of absolute power. The humans remained at the back of the hall watching everything, speaking to no one, asking no questions. As the first day ended and delegations began to disperse to their quarters, David stood and stretched. He looked out at the galaxy beyond the transparent wall. Lisa joined him, and together they watched the stars. "They think we are afraid," Lisa said. "I know," David replied. "That is exactly what we need them to think." The sun had set in the massive observation window. Darkness filled the space beyond the station. The great powers of the galaxy had made their agreements and claimed their territories. And in the back of the hall, the humans had learned exactly what they needed to know to change everything.